Welcome to Dead Man Talking. Tonight's show is a special treat for you all and myself, as we're joined by some familiar voices. Of course, if you're not familiar with these wonderful, talented people, I'll leave a link to their channels in the description box below the video, so you can get yourselves over there. Please do hit that subscribe button and let them know that I sent you. I'd just like to say also a huge thank you to both Swamp Dweller and Dr. Creepin for their continuing support, guys. Behind the lines, outside of the show, on Twitter, any advice I've ever needed to ask anyone. A lot of people just shoot you down or not even reply to a message, but both of these guys had nothing but time for me. Creepin, I think, featured, it must be back when we was about 6 months old. Just hit him up, it wasn't anyone special, just said, would you please come on the show a bit of support. Great fan of yours, and straight on it. Swamp Dweller even earlier than that. So please do take time to check out their shows if you don't already, and don't forget to smash that subscribe button. And so, without further ado, let's get into tonight's story, entitled Twin Falls Wildlife Management Area. Let's get straight into that. Growing up in the Appalachian Hills, you learned very quickly that there are certain places that you just don't go to. Certain areas that had a dark reputation, and for a good reason. Where I grew up at, that place was the Twin Falls Wildlife Management Area. We all just called it Twin Falls. It was mostly swampland. A small river fed the wetlands, cascading down into a dual waterfall, as the name suggests. This area is full of all sorts of wildlife and hosts plenty of hunting and fishing opportunities. But all of us locals avoid the place like the plague. I'm going to tell you about some things that have happened in this swamp, but this is just between you and me. Back in the 70s, the Sanderson brothers used to go down every Saturday and try to catch dinner. Donnie was 12 and Jacob was 11. They were fishing along the main channel, about 50 feet away from one of the main hiking trails. Donnie hooked into something big and started reeling it in, fighting with everything he had. Jacob said that he watched for a while and then finally put down his own rod to go help his brother. Jacob had to follow his narrow footpath up and around a large sycamore tree that was in between him and Donnie on the steep bankside. And just as Jacob was coming around the sycamore, he watched Donnie being pulled into the water. Jacob ran but couldn't get to the water's edge fast enough. Donnie struggled, splashed and screamed out. Something kept pulling him under, its greenish-grey arms wrapping around his torso. Where its flesh touched Donnie's, it seemed to be melting his skin away. Blood stained the water as Donnie disappeared under the murky depths. And Jacob ran almost 6 miles to the closest house for help, and they called the sheriff and some of the other local neighbours. By the time they got back down to the swamp, Donnie was gone. People were there for days, searching and dragging the bottom, but Donnie was never found. Later on, Jacob would recount that the thing looked like a man, but with that greenish-grey skin. He said that it had dark, shaggy hair and no face. Over on the western edge of the swamp is a large pine thicket, and some people say that a dogman lives in there. Other people say that the trees themselves are haunted. Either way, people kept disappearing in there, most of them never to be found again. One old man did make it back out, Charlie Kincaid. He had come down from one of the big universities, wanted to study some of the birds that lived in the swampland. He had spent about 3 weeks tromping around in there, taking pictures of birds and whatnot. When Charlie didn't show up at his hotel room for the 2nd day in a row, the hotel manager gave the call to the sheriffs and the park rangers. They searched through the swamp for 2 days and were about to call it off when one of the park rangers happened upon poor Charlie. He was on his belly, trying to crawl out of the pine thicket. One of his feet was missing, and he kept going on about the darkest dark. Charlie was rushed to the hospital where they were able to patch him up and save his life. Charlie went mad after that. He lived out the rest of his days at a psychiatric hospital. He would sit and rock back and forth for hours at a time and just keep repeating, "The darkest dark! The darkest dark!" A couple of years ago, A violent windstorm came through and knocked down the trees all over. One of the largest pines in the pine thicket fell, and it was hollow inside. They found it was full of human feet that had been lopped off, at least 50 of them, and something large had been inside of that hollowed out tree, scratching and clawing strange designs all over the inside of the tree trunk. A lady named Judy Albright actually managed to capture something on video not too long ago. She was driving along the stretch of road that passes by the waterfalls. When she noticed something moving alongside the edge of the road, she slowed down, afraid that it was a dog or some animal that might dart out in front of her. She slowed almost to a stop before she realised that it wasn't an animal. And Judy said that it looked like a man trying to do a crab walk. It was kind of upside down, with its arms and legs turned about the wrong way, almost inside out, she said. And its head was completely turned around and facing forward, almost as if it could swivel its head like an owl. She said that it was skittering along at a fast pace. It wasn't wearing any clothes and had what looked like a dead animal in its mouth. Judy sped out of there as fast as she could, suffering from a panic attack. She called her daughter on the way home. Her daughter Jewel arrived shortly after. After hearing her mother's story, Jewel pulled the footage off of the dash camera that had been installed just a month before. Sure enough, there on the video feed, you could see this crabman thing for a few seconds as the car slowed down. Jill said that she sent the video into the sheriff's office and then she destroyed the SD card that had the video on it. She said that nobody needed to see that thing. A little over a month later, Judy disappeared right out of her own home. They said nothing in the home was disturbed. The car was still on the drive, and it was all as if she just vanished. Jewel refused to talk about any of it, and not too long after, she packed up and moved away. My cousin Harold used to go turkey hunting in some fields down close to Twin Falls. He told me that one evening he was set up in a field waiting and hoping for a turkey, when something comes walking out across the field. He said it was about 50 yards away, and so he sighted it on with his binoculars. Harold said that it looked like some kind of bird. Maybe a crow and a human had been merged together. It had a head that looked like a giant crow, with a human torso and human arms and hands. Its legs were like a bird's, and he said that it walked like a bird. It was about 4 feet tall, and it seemed to be stalking something in the field. Harold said that eventually it stooped down and came up with a rat in its beak, and used its human hands to rip the rat in half and then proceeded to eat it. And when it was done, it went stalking off towards the edge of the field, back towards the swamps. There's lots of other stories and strange things that have happened around this area. If I were you, I would stay away from the Twin Falls Wildlife Management Area. It's not a friendly place.
My name is Brad, and this is a story about my family's and my own run-ins with a one-armed dog band that has become my greatest enemy. Well, let's get into the starting off. I am a well-seasoned hunter and an outdoorsman, and have been trained by Cherokee elders in many arts, mainly fighting, hunting, and knife techniques. But enough about me. Let's talk about how I lost an eye, and that bastard monster lost his right arm. Well, it was a morning like any other in the mountains of North Carolina. Cool, crisp, and damn well scary. To those who don't know these hills, I was heading to my best location for white-tailed deer, which is in an area called Wolf Ridge. Named so by my father, who had his own encounters with this beast, but that's another story. So, as I crested a ridge overlooking a stand of pines and sat down at the base of a large oak tree, then, as I began to focus, the feeling hit me. There were no sound, no smells, nothing. In other words, something was definitely not right. After years of hunting these hills, my senses are fine-tuned, and that's when I heard the sound of the dripping, and felt something hitting the brim of my hat. As I looked up, my blood ran cold, for above me, in the branches, was a large buck that had been torn to shreds. Seeing this, I knew that whatever killed this buck had to be close, as the blood was still fresh. I heard a sound snap right behind me in the brush. Thinking fast, I dropped to my knees just in the time to dodge the claws of this thing. But its charging bulk took me, and I rolled down the hill a short distance before jumping to my feet. I was met with the sight and sound of a beast from hell. Now, I believe my father, and now I know these things are called dogmen. 8 foot tall, 700 pound, upright werewolf. At the least, I was very outgunned and outclawed. I thought, crap, I'm dead for sure. Then something happened. My training took over and it saved my life. Now, my rifle was leaned on the tree below the buck, and he was between me and it, so I pulled my tomahawk and knife. What happened next was and is still hard to explain, but I'll try the best I can. This hulking beast charged me and clawed at my throat. Ducking in time, he only managed to blind me in my left eye. Time slowed, and I swung my blade up, severing his arm right below the elbow and jamming my tomahawk deep into his thigh. In that same moment, he howled in pain and fell to his knees, clutching his stump. The bastard will remember that. Where was I? Oh yes, as he glared at me with more hatred than Satan himself could bear, I reached the rifle, and man, did I let him have it. 4 rounds of 30-30 into his chest. Next thing I know, he is running down the hill at a speed I can't imagine, and I did the same, but in the opposite direction. I only stopped when I realized that I had put a good distance between us. The pain. Oh god, the pain. It hit me and sent me to the ground, and that's when I realized my eye was destroyed. I got out of those woods with one less eye, and with my life though. I'm sure the beast is alive. I hear his howls more than often now, and I fear he may return for his arm, and quite possibly my life.
I noticed the birthmark on my son's neck that my wife Elizabeth never did. 666. The numbers looked to be written in red ink and were clear as day. "Who did this?" I said angrily, looking around the room for any sign of guilt. Joshua had been born 2 hours earlier, and while I hadn't left the room for more than a few minutes, someone had to be responsible. But the doctor's puzzled look was genuine. "What are you referring to?" he asked. "I'll show you what I'm referring to," I said, picking my son up and walking back over. "This." His eyes looked down intently, and then back up at me. "There's nothing there," he said, not unkindly, as he gestured towards my son. When I looked back down at Joshua, the mark was gone. His neck was blank. "I'm so sorry," I said awkwardly, placing my son back with my wife as she gave me an angry look that would have been even worse had she still not been partially doped up from the meds. That was the first time I noticed that something was not exactly right with my son. Which brings me to my first rule. Keep frightening and unusual occurrences to yourself. 5 years went by, and though my son seemed social and friendly enough around my wife and I, he was unable to make a single friend at school, even the teachers feeling a general uneasiness around him. No one would give me a straight answer as to why, upon each play date, the other child would always end up crying. One particular father was so upset that he called me. "Is this Joshua's father?" "Yeah, I'm his father. What is... Our dog is missing. We think your son had something to do with it." And "Excuse me?" I interrupted. "Did you just make an accusation against my son?" Before he could respond, I continued. "Your dog probably ran away or got hit by a fucking car or something. If you call me again to complain about Joshua, the next conversation we have won't be over the phone." I could hear the fear in his voice as I hung up. I wonder now if the fear he felt wasn't from me at all. "Joshua, get in here now." A moment later, his dark brown eyes were staring up innocently into mine. "Yes, Daddy?" I just got a call from the Joneses. I watched the look in his eyes as he listened. Did you have anything to do with their dog going missing? My son's expression changed from innocent to cold. It growled at me, so I killed it. I stared at him blankly, taking what must have been 10 seconds to process what I had just heard. Go to your room, Joshua. But Daddy, Now, Joshua. Your mom and I are going to talk over what needs to be done. 2 days later, it wasn't just the Joneses' dog that went missing. It was their entire family. The husband, wife, and 2 little boys all up and vanished during the night. All the doors were locked from the inside, with no sign of a struggle or foul play. Their new Toyota Prius was still parked neatly in the driveway, and the keys were inside the ceramic fruit bowl on their kitchen table. The police were stumped, but I had my theories, and I had my nightmares. Which brings me to rule number 2. Never let animals around your child. Ever. It wasn't just the dog. Ever since my son was born, I had been finding dead birds scattered around through our yard. And it was other things as well. The woods behind our home that were once filled with the murmur of crickets and other tiny creatures at night were now dead silent. Months went by, and Joshua and I never spoke about the incident again. I'm ashamed to say that I was afraid to, and I wanted more than anything to pretend that none of this was really happening. Part of me did want to tell my wife Elizabeth my suspicions, but how could I? It was her son too, and most of what I felt was just that. Feelings. It wasn't until the night of his 6th birthday that I found the courage. After making sure Joshua was still busy playing in his room, I walked down the hallway to our bedroom and locked the door behind me. Elizabeth, can we talk for a second? Before I could continue, she replied, David, I'm scared. There's something about Joshua, I interrupted. I know. The 2 of us stared at each other for a moment, surprised yet not. She hugged me close. What do we do? And then the lights went out. Where's your phone? I asked. Kitchen. Yours? I shook my head. I don't know. And then the music started. First quiet and almost imagined, and then louder. Is that what I think it is? I asked, swallowing nervously. My wife nodded. Sonata number 2. I looked back at her in disbelief. Is it a recording? But I knew the sound of our grand piano well enough. Joshua had never even practiced before. As the soft murmur of the piano began to swell, the echo throughout the house became ominous, even violent. Elizabeth and I sat down on the bed together, holding each other's hand worriedly. Her eyes stared into mine as she found the courage to continue. I don't think he's our son. That's crazy, right? I said nothing, only pulling her closer and trying desperately to block out the terrifying melody that was pushing its way farther into my mind. For a moment, I thought we could escape through the window, but our bedroom was on the steeper side of our home. It was far too high to try and jump out of. The sonata finished, the dark growl of the piano dying down and finally becoming silent. I pressed my ear up against the wooden door. After a moment, hearing the soft patter of footsteps on the other side. Daddy? Mommy? I searched for the right words as I tried to hide my fear. Stupidly, I said the first thing that came to mind. Joshua, you are mad at us, are you? There was silence. And then the voice continued, but this time it wasn't the voice of the little boy I had known for the past 6 years. It was much deeper. It wasn't a little boy's voice at all. "That depends. Am I still your son?" My eyes drifted towards my wife, terrified and crying on our bedroom floor. I wasn't far behind. Yes. "Say it." "You're our son." A minute or so of the most terrifying silence followed, and then the familiar voice of a child returned. "Good, Daddy. Now come on out so we can have some cake." I looked at my wife nervously as my hand unlocked the door. Before it was even open completely, Joshua took my wrist and led me into the kitchen to do the honors. Which brings me to my third rule. If they tell you to keep pretending, do it. It's not so bad after a while. Not so different really from raising a real little boy or girl. Just remember to follow the rules and maybe you'll even stay alive. At least that's what Joshua keeps telling me. The years went by, and that was a long time ago now. My son Joshua is much older. Instead of his 6th birthday tonight, it's his 16th. A big day, you might say. But it's not for the normal reasons you'd think. A quick history of what's happened over the past 10 years. I've tried my best to follow my son's rules. I've tried to keep Elizabeth and I alive. A few months after that night with the piano and the agreement, my wife and I decided to try and have another child. A real child. Though Joshua was seemingly kind enough about it, I've always thought he had something to do with the series of miscarriages that followed. Though he never threatened us like he had that night, there were more occurrences. More animals in the neighborhood started going missing, ranging from the neighbor's cat Stella to a stray German shepherd named Silver. There were even children. I told myself for years that every town has missing kids, that it's a natural reality of life. I told myself that there are bad people everywhere, and that Joshua had nothing to do with the string of disappearances lately. But I don't really believe that. They weren't disappearances as much as sacrifices. The children's bodies would be found with an upside-down cross knifed neatly into their forehead, and a certain look on their faces. Their jaws were snapped open, forever frozen in terror and what I would bet you was the revealing of something's true form. My wife Liz is in the hospital with cancer, and I think maybe selfishly for me that was the final straw. While I don't know if Josh caused the disease physically, in a way I am certain that he did. Elizabeth just hasn't been the same since we made that deal so many years ago. The miscarriages after only fueling her depression farther. Her eyes have seemed dead for years. Dead like the children will never have. Dead like the animals in our town. Dead like all the people that I should have protected. It took me 10 years, but I'm finally going to kill him. I'm going to kill my son. No, I'm not calling him that anymore. I'm going to kill it. It was never my son. I've spent the past couple years getting ready in my own way. Late at night, I would do research about the occult and demons, studying how exactly to combat them and come out alive. I hope I'm ready. My research has told me that there's 3 things you need to destroy a demon. The first is salt. It can create a barrier around you if needed, as to buy you time to finish the ritual. The second is a cross or a Bible, and a measure of faith. I never used to believe in God, but I've been driven to it now. and 3, a holy man or woman. I've known Father Malachi for over 10 years at this point, and he is well informed about what we're going up against. He's not as young as he used to be, this year going into his 75th, but his faith is as strong as anyone I've ever met. I told the father to show up this evening once Joshua is asleep. We plan to surprise him in his room before midnight. Maybe he won't be at his full strength. Maybe he won't be ready. I'm writing this because if the two of us don't make it back, there needs to be some record of Joshua. Maybe you can pick up where we left off. I think I've learned everything there is to know about demons, but I could be wrong. If I am wrong, at least you'll have something to go on. I'm getting ready now. Wish us luck. Hello. My name's Joshua, and it's my 16th birthday today. It went a little different than I expected. I told my parents I was going to school, but I decided to skip school today. I'm a good kid, but I just had a certain feeling. While everyone was gone, I happened to come across my father's journal. I know you're supposed to respect your parents and not go through their things, but something told me to take a look inside. You can imagine my surprise when I find years of research about me. It really hurt to think that those I care about and love could really believe that I was something like a demon. How dull. No, demons are a dime a dozen. Something as unique as me only comes around once every 1,000 years or so. I suppose you know that my name isn't Joshua at all. Maybe if you're especially wise, you even know its pronunciation. But it doesn't really matter, does it? David should have killed me 10 years ago. I thought it would be poetic for my father's adopted son to add the last entry to his journal of rules, I guess you could say. Oh, right. What happened to him? Well, if you must know, when Father Malachi and my own father came into my room tonight to try and destroy me, they weren't ready. Let's just say they met a very tragic end. I'll give them this. They were more prepared than even I anticipated. And there was a moment in our struggle where it truly might have gone the other way. That's staggering when you think about what they were up against. Father Malachi truly was a good man of faith, and there aren't a lot of those around anymore. They put up a good fight. I almost felt pity as I watched their enthusiasm. Clearly, they had put a lot of time into getting ready. They were just out of their league. I buried them alive, with their crosses and salt and faith to keep them company. I dug the 2 holes close enough together in hopes that they could hear each other scream as they struggled and took their last breaths. I wonder which one made it longer. Huh. Anyway, that brings me to the ending of my father's journal, and the last rule when facing a demon. Rule number 4. Always be sure they are what you think,
lest you be unprepared.
Well, I'm sorry to leave like this, but I have to go to the hospital now. I'm going to see Mom. She's got breast cancer, and something tells me that she's not going to last a whole lot longer. Oh, and if we should ever meet, I advise you to look the other way and just keep on walking. It would be wise not to try and do anything foolish.
It's true, what they say. Monsters do exist,
They have always existed and will continue to do so. They live in our minds, infesting them with suicidal and horrible thoughts. Some of us give in, some of us don't. It's the battle that never ends. But there are more strange and fearsome things. The things that lurk in the shadows and only come out when it's dark on our planet. They feast on us, on our fear, our guilt, and every bad emotion we have. This is a story about one of those things that want to destroy our people, kill us, torture us. I stare at the TV screen, just some classic bullshit about politics again. My mind wanders off to several different thoughts. My wife, my job, my family. I work for the local police station and, since there are rarely any crimes in this town, we mostly eat donuts, drink coffee and get fat. Although I wouldn't call myself that. I go to the gym every day and try to eat healthy. Although tonight I have a bag of chips with me. A thought comes rushing into my mind. It was about a case we had last month. A man was washed ashore. He was dead, obviously, and covered in bite marks. And in some parts of his body there was flesh ripped out. His eyes were gone as well. We thought sharks, but they don't usually just bite some dead prey and leave it. No. There was something quite off about this bizarre incident. We had to close the case since there were no suspects, and the man's body was too destroyed to identify him. I felt a breeze of cold air the moment I sat up from the couch. The kitchen window was open. I got up to close it, and as I did, I saw a figure standing outside, looking at our window. I was a bit creeped out, I'm not going to lie. I hesitantly closed the window and then shut the blinds, thinking about how creepy this actually was. I yawned and opened the bedroom. My wife was long asleep, so I kissed her on the cheek, dressed down to my underwear and silently got into bed and pulled the covers over my body. I was awoken at about 3 a.m. from knocking on the door. We lived in an apartment on the 4th floor, so it wasn't likely that any homeless person could have gotten in. Yet I got up, put on a pair of shorts, since it was summer outside, and went to look. I heard the knock again, and this time it was more violent. I said, "Hello?" and immediately regretted saying it. From the other side of the door, I heard an old man's voice. "Go, run, they'll get you, run, run, they will eat you." And then there was silence. I listened for breathing, but there was none. In fact, it was way too quiet, more than it should be. We lived under a bar, and people go there every night. I was really creeped out when I, once again, felt cold air rush up my back. I looked behind me and saw the window in the kitchen open again. What? I'd closed it when I went to sleep. I walked slowly to the kitchen and to the window. I saw the same figure still standing there. I shut the window fast, locking it with a lock that we had over each window. I shut the blinds, took my gun from the safe and put it on my nightstand, just in case. I went back to bed, but it's needless for me to say that I didn't close my eyes once again that night. The next morning, once I woke up, my wife was cooking breakfast already. I entered the kitchen, still tired from the sleepless night, said good morning to her and asked if she had opened the window at night. She denied doing it, so I was left thinking about this all day long. I won't bother telling you about my workday, because it was boring as hell. Nothing ever happened in this small town. I got home before my wife, because she works at the mall and she comes home at 8. I had about 3 hours for myself, so I decided to check out the window once again. I opened the blinds and let the sun shine in. The dark figure was obviously gone. Nothing seemed off or out of the ordinary. The window wasn't broken or anything, and I had no explanation as to how it had opened, if none of us had done it. We don't have strong winds here. Not ones that will blow open a shut window. Definitely not. I was confused. Things like this just don't happen. I don't believe in ghosts or anything like that. I decided to throw some bad thoughts out of my head and go out to smoke a cigarette and wait for my wife to come home, since she only works a few 100 meters away from here and she's on foot. Once she gets home, we order pizza for dinner, watch a movie, and do adult stuff. Talk, laugh, drink a bit. We go to sleep at around 1 a.m. and I check the window before we do so. It's shut. No figure standing outside this night. I go to the back door and check the lock on the door as well. Locked, and no sound outside. I go back to the bathroom, turn out the lights, and jump into bed. I feel cold. I wake up. My watch is unplugged. I turn around and see the bed beside me empty. Cold sweat is rushing down my spine. My wife is gone. I bolt upright in bed. I feel the cold again. I grab my gun and walk out of the bedroom. What I see is terrifying. Every window is open, wide open. The cool air is blowing in. I proceed to close every window and, as I do, I call for my wife. No answer. I check the bathroom and every other room. Nothing. Finally, the kitchen. The window is the last one open there. I walk inside the dark kitchen, pointing my gun at the window. It's an intruder, I proceed to tell myself. But something inside me knows this is something worse. I don't dare to turn on the lights in the kitchen. I'm scared that I might see something I don't know. I slowly approach the window. Then I see it. It's my wife. Well, her face to be exact. A minute later, it's gone. I want to call out to her, but I can't. My mouth is dry. My hand with the gun is now shaking. I'm at the window, and I see it. The figure. It's sitting on the tree. It's not a man. It has 6 eyes and way too many arms. It sits there, smiling with its huge mouth. I don't know what to do. One's mind can only process what it understands. Then, suddenly, the creature lunges at me, trying to grab me with its long and nail-covered fingers. I fire a shot at it. The bullet just bounces off, so I try pushing it away from myself. It tries to eat my face, but I use all of my strength I have in me to push its jaws away from me. Then, an idea sparks into my mind. I'm gonna burn myself and this fucker with it. Our flat has a gasoline tank. It's not much, but it might be enough to light this apartment on fire. I know this sounds crazy, but I think it's the only chance I've got. With all of my strength, I push this thing off me and throw a kitchen knife at it. It screams a terrifying scream and growls in pain. This gives me the split second to close the window and rush out of the room and shut the door behind me. I feel pain in my wrist. Blood is soaking in my shorts as well. I take the gasoline container from the washing room and open it, splashing the gasoline all over the floor. What surprises me is that I hear no sound from the kitchen whatsoever. I empty half of it and proceed to walk back to the kitchen. I wait for a moment, then brace myself for the worst and walk inside. My wife is standing in front of me. She wraps her arms around me and starts whispering to me, and I almost believe that it's her. But there is one thing. Since when does my wife have red eyes? I scream and punch her away. Immediately her skin starts peeling off, revealing the creature. I smile and splash the remaining gasoline around me and on the creature as well. It stares at me for a moment. I look into its eyes of hell. Then I pull out my lighter, and just as the thing jumps on top of me, I drop it on the ground. I feel sharp pain, and then I'm falling into the black abyss. Local newspaper reports: 4 killed in apartment fire. The fire supposedly started from the 4th floor and lit up the whole building. It took 2 days for the firemen to completely extinguish the fire, which could have been caused by a gasoline explosion. The bodies of 4 persons were found. All were men. The most destroyed body had bizarre marks on it. Parts of the man's body were bitten out, and his eyes were gone.
Wow. Absolutely awesome stuff. Thank you to all involved, the authors, my good friends there, LighthouseHorror, Dr. Creepin' Van Pasta, and of course Swamp Dweller. Do take time to check out their fantastic narration channels, always with brand new content regularly. As ever, please do let us know down below in the comments what you thought. Please do like and share. It really does help build the channel and our community further. And of course, don't forget to hashtag TeamFEAR. I hope you're all well and happy and made it through a grueling week of hard work and are ready for a relaxing weekend with friends and family. And above all, remember, be safe, not sorry.